Travel back with me over 500 years to the Joseon dynasty. We're diving straight into the incredible source material behind the book Empires of Virtue, the history and morals of ancient Korea. We're looking closely at a legendary 16th century textbook originally called Mong Seup. Now, this wasn't just some casual weekend read. We're talking about the absolute bedrock of an entire civilization's educational system.
So what did it actually take to build a good citizen half a millennium ago? It's a pretty wild thought, right? As we go through this explainer, I want you to really ask yourself, how could an ancient text, one specifically designed to mold the minds of 16th century kids, actually hold the antidote to today's, well, incredibly cynical and fast-paced culture? How did they view human nature, and what can we pull from their intensely structured approach to everyday life?
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. 1. A textbook for a dynasty. 2. The 5 constant virtues. 3. History as a moral mirror. And 4. Timeless principles for today.
Let's jump right into Section 1. A textbook for a dynasty. The origins of Mong Seup.
To really get this text, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the Neo-Confucian Joseon dynasty. Education back then, it wasn't just about padding a resume for getting a job. It was about shaping the very soul of a citizen, literally from the moment they could read. Which brings us to the author, Park Se-moo, who lived from 1487 to 1554. He came from this highly prestigious lineage and lived through the super volatile political reign of King Myeongjong. But here's the fascinating part. He didn't write this book to climb the political ladder or get famous. He actually walked away from the dangerous politics of the royal court to fulfill what he felt was his absolute holy responsibility as a father. He wrote this purely as a moral compass for his own kids.
And honestly, this brilliantly sums up his entire vibe. Park adopted the pen name Soyodong, which literally translates to not pursuing power and greed, but just sojourn and live at leisure. The guy literally walked away from earthly success to just focus entirely on internal virtue and his family. But in a massive twist of irony, this deeply personal, fatherly side project resonated so powerfully that it eventually became a mandatory national textbook. I mean, they even used it to educate the crown princes of the dynasty. How crazy is that?
So this personal project became the gold standard in the Seodang. These were private village schools that basically functioned as elementary and secondary education, and kids entered when they were just 6 or 7 years old. The foundational belief at play here was that kids are basically empty vessels, and the adults believed it was their absolute, uncompromising duty to fill these vessels with wholesome ethics before those kids stepped out into the wider world.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 5 constant virtues, the classical texts.
The stakes in these classical texts were, I cannot stress this enough, incredibly high. The great philosopher Mencius straight up believed that humans who don't follow these virtues are no less than beasts. The core of this is a Neo-Confucian concept called the Sanggong-Wuchang, the 3 fundamental bonds and 5 constant virtues. Now, in the Joseon worldview, these weren't just, polite suggestions or self-help tips. No, these were considered heaven's laws, the eternal essence of life. They truly believe these principles started and ended in tandem with the sky and the earth itself.
So think about how every single facet of human interaction is broken down into this incredibly strict, perfectly ordered matrix. Between father and son, the core essence is affection. Between king and subject, righteousness. Husband and wife operate on distinction, meaning distinct but complementary celestial roles. Adults and children rely on order, and friends are bound by trust. In Joseon society, this matrix was the ultimate ethical compass. Literally every human interaction you ever had fell into one of these buckets, and you had a very specific heavenly role to play in each one.
But how did you actually pull this off? It definitely wasn't just rote memorization. Students were taught these 2 concepts, Li and Shi. Li is the abstract ideal principle. Think of it as the blueprint of virtue. But Shi, that's the vital force. It's your actual physical energy and matter. So to be a truly virtuous citizen, you couldn't just know the rules. You had to actively master your Shi so your physical actions perfectly match that abstract blueprint of Li. You had to literally embody the philosophy.
And out of all these virtues, the text makes one thing extremely clear. Filial piety, total devotion to your parents, is the absolute root of all myriad acts. If you fail here, well, you fail everywhere. The text gives this really stark warning about 3 dire outcomes if a child neglects this duty. First,
they become totally fixated on wealth and their own spouse or kids at the expense of their parents. Second, they get consumed by sensory pleasures and end up disdaining their elders. Or third, they get so obsessed with glory and winning that they actually put their parents' lives at risk. It's an incredibly intense, clear-cut warning.
This text was actually so revered that in 1742, King Yongzhou himself wrote a foreword for it. He said, "Being sincere and earnest is just like the two wheels of the wagon and two wings of the bird for the purpose of honing study." He totally understood that without true internal sincerity, all this scholarship was just, a murky, empty exercise. You absolutely needed earnestness to transform all these lofty words into a lived reality.
All right, Section 3. History as a Moral Mirror. The Cycles of Order and Ruin.
You see, Park Se-moo didn't just teach virtues in the abstract. He actually used history as this sort of giant temporal laboratory. By tracing the Chinese dynasties all the way from the Shah to the Ming, students were basically taught to view history entirely through a moral lens. Like, the Zhou dynasty achieved this incredible zenith of culture because they followed the way, but the Shang dynasty fell into total turmoil, and the Qin dynasty became a literal reign of terror, specifically because their leaders lacked virtue. For them, history wasn't just a bunch of dates and battles to memorize. It was absolute, concrete proof of the 5 constant virtues in action.
And this exact moral framework was mapped right alongside Korea's own timeline, starting from the founding of Gojoseon all the way back in 2333 BC, flowing through the Three Kingdoms, and eventually leading to the Joseon dynasty itself. A huge emphasis in the text is this inextricable, super intimate relationship between China and Korea. Korea actually viewed itself as Junior China, which was this really proud title, meaning that their adherence to rights, music, and propriety was just as beautiful and just as aligned with heaven as China's. It was viewed as this profoundly brotherly civilization.
So the crucial historical takeaway here is pretty stark. When holy monarchs seek the way and genuinely practice virtue, society gets to experience these abundant, well-ordered days. But, and it's a big but, the exact second mediocre, dim-witted monarchs or traitors take the wheel and abandon those virtues, massive disruption and utter ruin inevitably follow. History is literally just a mirror reflecting the efficacy of the way.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Timeless Principles for Today, A Bridge to the Modern West.
So you might be wondering, why does a 16th century textbook matter to us right now? Well, translators Carlton Bryce and Kwan Byung-chul made it super accessible through this brilliant dual translation approach. First, there's an English-compatible version that acts as a bridge, making all these deep philosophical concepts totally digestible for a modern Western audience. But then, they also include a fidelity to original version that honors the strict, literal 16th century phrasing. It's this incredible labor of love spanning 500 years.
Modern translator Carlton Bryce actually points out, this is a book for all people. Its timeless principles reverberate down to the present and resonate with people of today. His whole passionate mission with this translation is to completely dismantle those shallow Hollywood cliches about Confucianism. He wants to offer these solid, eternal moral practices to a modern youth culture that, let's be honest, he sees as increasingly cynical and dour.
And this really perfectly illustrates the book's ultimate, totally unchanging premise. The translators note that while the word indoctrination has a super negative ring to it today, Park Se-moo understood something fundamental. Children are empty vessels. If we as a society don't deliberately fill them up with what is good and wholesome, well, they are automatically going to be filled up by whatever is crooked and indecent around them. Education is literally never neutral. We have a holy responsibility to guide the next generation.
So, I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought. If this 16th century moral mirror were held up to our society today, what exactly would it reflect? Are we acting as the holy monarchs of our own lives, or are we letting the days of disruption completely outnumber our days of peace? Ultimately, the answers lie in mastering our own virtue. If you want to dive deeper into these absolutely incredible teachings, I highly encourage you to check out Empires of Virtue, The History and Morals of Ancient Korea. It is just a phenomenal read that bridges 500 years of history right to your front door. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.